waiting to start. Hello everybody. Please let me know when you're here, and I will try and not have such a croaky voice for the rest of it. There we go. Send a list to people. Come let me know when you're here so I can start conversation that's important to a lot of us, this thing around sleep and menopause and what happens to us and why we can't sleep. It's also interesting, isn't it, that hi Tracy, good to see you there. It's also interesting, isn't it, that when we're sort of, if those of us who've got children, we manage, don't we, when we get so little sleep when they're little, but we struggle the older we get. And they tell us the older we get we need less sleep, but when we can't get it, it really is a challenge. If you're listening, and at the moment there's not many of you here, but I'll start anyway, because obviously you can rewind and come in. I want to know, on a scale of 1, which is no problems, to 10, hi Naomi, to 10, can't sleep. So on a scale of 1, no problems, to 10, can't sleep, how has the perimenopause or menopause affected your sleep? So has it really made any difference or not? So when I thought about this question for myself, I wasn't sure. Because 7, Naomi says 7, so towards the end of it's affecting more than big, and Tracy says 10, it's really affected her. It's interesting because I'm postmenopausal and I'm not sure how much it affected me. I think it probably has. But I'm not sure how much that was menopause and how much that was stress, or the two interacting between each other. So if we talk about that, so we've got 7 and a 10, and I would say I was probably somewhere in the middle, 5-ish. But over 3/4 of perimenopausal women talk about sleep issues. In fact, it's when you do a survey, sleep issues nationally has come out to be near the top as one of the issues that really affects people. Used to be able to go back off, now I can't. So this is the waking up and then can't get back to sleep. And Naomi says, I always slept like a log and needed half an hour of alarms to wake me up. But now I often wake between 2 and 4, but not sure how much of it is due to stress, medication, or perimenopause. And this is one of the other things. I started taking medication for other things, my migraines, which make you sleepy. But the problem with those is they affect the quality of your sleep. And that's a challenge. So although I don't know that I have trouble sleeping, I'm not convinced the quality of my sleep is that good. And that's something we're going to come to. But as I say, over 3/4 of women say that they are having trouble with their sleep. And of course, it then brings in some of those other things around perimenopause, doesn't it? And it's kind of chicken and egg, because lack of sleep affects our ability to control our eating, because it affects our hunger chemicals. We don't get the messages around hunger. We crave carbohydrates when we're tired. It affects our mood. It affects our ability to control our emotions. It's more likely to make us irritable. It's more likely to make us anxious. It means that we can't think as clearly, that brain fog, that memory, that concentration, all of those things that we know are associated with perimenopause, they're actually associated with lack of sleep. So it's chicken and egg. Which comes first? Lack of sleep gives you the symptoms, or the symptoms affect the level of your sleep. A whole range of other things. The other protective things around sleep, it boosts your brain power, it boosts your immunity. So if you're not sleeping very well, you're more likely to catch things. It protects your cardiovascular system. So it's more, if you're sleeping well, then things like blood pressure and things like cardiovascular health in terms of your heart and things like that are likely to be better than if you don't sleep well. And as I said before, it controls the hunger hormones. So sleep is a really important thing. And there are some studies, but now I'm going to be really questionable about these because they're not long-lived enough. And I was talking to an expert about this a couple of weeks ago, and he agrees that the evidence on this is limited at best. That suggests that sleep and dementia are linked, or poor sleep and dementia are linked. And there's certainly a link. If you have dementia, your sleep is affected. But does lack of sleep cause dementia? less likely. Hi Yvonne, good to see you here. I'm just wondering, Yvonne, you missed the question. On a scale of 1, which is no problems, to 10, can't sleep, really struggling to sleep, how has perimenopause or menopause affected your sleep? Has it affected it not at all, 1, or terribly, I don't get any sleep now, 10, or somewhere in between? So there's not a long-term enough study to say there's a causal link. So you might hear it out there that, you know, a 1% decrease in deep sleep gives you an increase of a quarter, or 27% increase in your risk of dementia. That's one study, and it was not long-term enough. So it's not something that I would happily state, which is why I bring it to your attention, because you hear it, but there's limited evidence. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the case, because we do know that Alzheimer's and the like does affect sleep. But there are other things that are linked that might have some causal effect. And around 2/3 of women in late perimenopause and menopause have sleep disordered breathing. So that's 2/3. That means over 6 in every 10, near a 7 in every 10 women will have sleep disordered breathing. That means that we don't breathe properly, but we don't know it. So that's something we're going to touch on, because actually, is it the menopause symptoms causing the sleep issues, or is it that's causing the sleep issues? And given that so many women have it, where's the link? And we know that lifestyle affects sleep. So all of these things are really important. We can say menopause affects sleep, but these other things are highly critical, highly important in terms of how well we sleep. And lifestyle is one of the biggest indicators. So my next question to you, you're a 7, Yvonne. Okay, that's kind of where Naomi was as well. So I think I'm about a 5. So my next question is, how much sleep do you get? And is it good quality? If you have, like me, and I suspect both Yvonne and Naomi do too, a activity watch. I mean, I've got a Garmin. I think Yvonne's got a Garmin. It will tell you your sleep, and mine tells me what sort of sleep I'm getting and the quality of the sleep. And mine varies, which is really interesting. And I know when I'm ill, the quality of my sleep plummets because I don't get much deep sleep. But the quality of your sleep matters. So you hear these things that say you need 7 to 10 hours of sleep a night. That's not strictly true. The most important thing is the quality of the sleep that you get. So how much sleep do you get, and is it good quality? The stages of the sleep are interesting. There are 4 stages of sleep. Now, we often hear about REM, and I'm going to come to that last, but there are 4 stages of sleep. There's the stage where we're just starting to fall asleep, and that's called N1. So our brain waves are changing, our brain patterns are changing slightly. It's calming the brain down. We're beginning to settle, but it's quite a light sleep. We're easily aroused at this point, but we're just settling. Then we get into N2, which is still a light sleep, but a bit deeper than N1, and the brainwaves are doing something slightly different. Then there's the slow wave sleep, which is the deep sleep of N3. And at this point, we are incredibly hard to wake because our arousal systems have been turned off. There's only certain things that would trigger us awaking at this point. Most things will not awake us at this point. And then there's REM sleep. Now, unless you have a REM disorder, REM sleep paralyzes your body. To a certain degree, so does N3. N4 is REM. And at this point, you can't move. But this is the sleep we often know about. It's called rapid eye movement sleep. You will dream in N1 and N2. In N3, if you dream, you won't know about it. N1 and N2 are often the ones where you're waking, and you might remember those. They feel more like a real life. N4 is kind of, I don't know, surreal dreaming. And your eyes are moving rapidly, which is why it's called REM sleep. And there's much more arousal in the brain in many areas, but it's turned inwards on itself. So although those arousal centres looking for sight and sound are there, they're working on an inward picture, not an outward picture. And in this period, you're going to have erratic breathing. Your heart rate and your BP rise to just around where you would be if you were awake, but you cannot be woken very easily at all. And there is no movement because the GABA release in your system, the hormone triggers GABA, and that paralyzes muscles in the brainstem, paralyzes muscles so you can't move. And it kind of stops you acting out your dreams. It stops you running away from that thing that's chasing you. But it's also why you might feel like you're being, you can't do stuff, like you're being pinned down and things like that, because you can't move. You literally can't move. In this period of time, because of this really high level of brain activity in the amygdala, which is where we process emotions, which is really central. It's just above the brainstem. It's very central. They think that's when we process emotions, when we make sense of the day that we've had and things that are coming up. So it's a really important part of sleep. But in fact, all stages are important, and we cycle through them at different periods of time. And the further we get towards morning, the further into our sleep we get, the longer the REM cycle lasts. And in essence, we have about a quarter of our sleep should be in REM, and just under half should be in that second. So if you've got a Garmin watch, it's the first two, N1 and N2, that it would identify. And about just under a half should be, well, about a half should be in that, maybe a little bit more. But you work, these cycles are about 90 to 110 minutes long. And it goes N1, N2, N3, N2, N4, then a brief awakening, and then repeat. And you should have about 4 or 5 cycles of those a night to have a good night's sleep. So really, when we're looking at sleep, it's 4 or 5 cycles which have all of those periods in it. And each cycle is somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours long. So that gives you an indication. Recently, they've discovered this bit in the brain that they weren't aware of before, which is called the glymphatic system. And that cleans waste from our brain mostly while we're asleep, in the non-REM period. So N1 and N2 mostly, but a little bit in N3 too. Now, this is why they're saying if you don't get certain types of sleep, you might be at risk of Alzheimer's. But the risk is the evidence is so little. It's just a question that's been postulated. Because you need that period of sleep for your brain to be able to flush out the waste products from the day, the proteins, etc., that are hanging around from the interactions it's done during the day and all the chemical actions that have taken place. The other thing that happens is that the whole part of the sleep cycle starts with the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is that little bit sort of, it's kind of, if you take your nose and go backwards from that, it's kind of there, a little bit near the pituitary gland. It's in the middle of your brain, because that is responsible for your circadian rhythm. And your circadian rhythm is the bit that is basically your sleep-wake cycle. And it's really important that your body has a routine like that. And one of the things they're beginning to postulate about menopause is it disrupts that. Because of the hormonal changes, it disrupts the signals to the hypothalamus, therefore disrupting the release of melatonin. Therefore, you have a difficulty. Hey, nice to see you there, Lucy. Finally, you're here. Brilliant. Not stuck in traffic or trying to get to Thurston or anything like that. It's great to have you here. So this whole thing around perhaps some of the issues are the hormones affect the hypothalamus, which affects our circadian rhythm, which affects our release of melatonin. If we don't have, life gets in the way, it often does, doesn't it, Lucy? That's one of the things. Melatonin is the chemical we need in our brains to stimulate the sleep. Because the way we wake and sleep, in the evenings we need to build up melatonin, which makes us feel sleepy, so we go to sleep. And in the mornings we want cortisol spike to wake us up. And one of the things that happens that disrupts us in the sleep, and one of the reasons why you might wake up, be unaware why you've woken up and then not be able to get to sleep, is you have a cortisol spike. And as we've talked before, if you don't manage your cortisol, you're reducing your levels of estrogen in your system because you've got too much cortisol. then it brings on all the other symptoms. It triggers hot flashes, it does all sorts of things. So this business around needing the melatonin cortisol pattern to be smoothed out is where we're at. And it's important then we look at that. So let's look at ways that we can do that. The first thing I want to look at though is that the fact that I said to you around 3/4 of women, and nearly 70% of women have sleep disordered breathing once they hit late perimenopause, menopause. So I'm going to ask you a question you might not like to answer. Do you snore? Or do you breathe noisily? Do you have breaks in your breathing? Or do you breathe with your mouth open at night? And I can answer yes to that because Bob keeps telling me I snore. But I don't think I have breaks in my breathing. I think my issue is I breathe with my mouth open. And I have nasal congestion, which is part of the problem. But I have some other issues that come in. So, if you have any of those things, if you snore, breathe noisily at night, have breaks in your breathing, or breathe with your mouth open, it's more likely that one of the biggest issues for you, don't know, you're going to have to ask your husband, Tracy. It's more likely, like a train. There you go, Lucy. This is one of the likeliest reasons why you're struggling with your sleep or struggling with staying asleep. So this won't affect getting to sleep. That's the melatonin. This will affect staying asleep, because you won't be breathing levelly, and those breaks in breathing or the ineffective breathing that you're doing triggers more wakefulness because it doesn't allow you to settle. It wakes you up. And the other question, does your lack of sleep, or do you feel tired during the day? So you might not actually realise that you're struggling to sleep at night. You might not realise you're waking. But if you're feeling tired or restless or lacking energy or concentration and all of these different things, if you feel sleepy during the day, then Justin says, I breathe strange at times. Stop. That could well be the obstructive breathing then, which is very common as well. It's very, very common in postmenopausal or menopausal females, and I'll explain why in a minute. I will explain now. It's to do with the fact that I've said before, the hormonal changes loosen the elasticity of the muscles. We lose strength in our muscles. Well, our palate at the back, the soft tissues at the back of our throat and our throat are no different. They get looser, so they're more likely to collapse. But I just want to ask you all a question, actually, which is, if you close your mouth and breathe, where's your tongue? Because you should be breathing, when you're just breathing normally, your tongue should be gently pressed on the gums behind the teeth. Well, a bit back from the teeth, at the top of your mouth. If your tongue naturally rests, this is when you're laid on the floor, by the way. If your tongue naturally rests when you're lying back on the floor, on the bottom of your mouth, it will affect your breathing overnight. So you need to learn to train it and practice this daily, of training your tongue to be on the top of your mouth, because that way you are opening up your airway. So try it. Lie down on the floor, not now, unless you want to, because you can do now. Lie down on the floor on your back, close your mouth, and notice where your tongue is. And feel how difficult it is to breathe if it's on the bottom of your mouth. And then place it gently at the top of your mouth and feel the airway open up. Because and if it naturally lays there, imagine when you're asleep, it's going to drop, isn't it? It's going to drop a lot more. So that throat is likely to collapse, which will disrupt your breathing. The stop-start breathing. Mine's at the bottom of your mouth, yes. And that'll be it as well. So so there are lots of things that we can do. And what I'm going to do in the blog that I write and in the Facebook group tomorrow is put some links in for you to test yourself on these things. And then some videos for some self-help physio that you can do to change your breathing. And basically, in the same way as we need to exercise our other muscles in our body, more so when we hit perimenopause, to keep them working, we need to exercise and train our throat to behave appropriately, because it suddenly stops working properly. And that might be the reason why so many of us don't feel like we're getting a good night's sleep. We awake feeling, we wake in the morning, think we still need more sleep, or we struggle during the day. And If we are snoring, if we're noisy breathers, if we breathe with our mouth open, you might know you wake up with a dry mouth or whatever it is, those will be the issues. There are some simple things like sleeping on your front or sleeping on your side propped up will help rather than sleeping on your back, but it can be remedied, and medications don't help. They actually make this worse, which is why you have to be careful about it, and which is why I mention it. So the other thing to be aware of when we get to this stage in our lives is something called our CO2 tolerance decreases. That means our ability to tolerate levels of CO2 in our system goes down. Now, I know this because when I was younger, and even 15 years younger, I could hold my breath and swim underwater for a long time. I could swim a length easily. Now I struggle to hold my breath even for 15 seconds. And that's because my CO2 tolerance, the carbon dioxide, which is the waste material from respiration, so from our cells using the oxygen to create energy in our blood, my tolerance for that has gone down. And it creates this thing called overbreathing. And this is, interestingly, over 60% of menopausal, perimenopausal women, postmenopausal women have this problem with their CO2 tolerance. Symptoms might be you yawn a lot, you need to breathe through your mouth for minimal exertion. You're going for a walk and you find you need to breathe through your mouth. Heavy exertion, you might need to breathe through your mouth anyway. But if you struggle with that idea when you're, say, running or doing exercise, where they say breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and you go, well, I need to grab air, that actually might be because your CO2 tolerance is lower, not because you need more oxygen. It's very rarely lack of oxygen. It's more likely, air hunger is more likely to be CO2 tolerance rather than too little oxygen. But again, the good news is you can train this away. So this is somewhere where I'll give you a link for that as well. So be aware of that, because you also find you might find you overbreathe. You might get pins and needles in your face, in your arms. You might get headaches. You might wake with a headache. That's one of the other signs. You might wake with a headache. If you wake with jaw ache, you're probably clamping your jaw as well, which is not going to help in terms of where your throat is and your trachea, being able to breathe through it. But as I said, the good news is all of this can be done with exercise. And if you're really struggling with the exercise, there are people out there who have jobs that actually teach you this. There's physiotherapy specifically for this. So there are breathing clinics that teach you how to breathe. Ipswich Hospital has one. So you can get a referral and get it done that way. I know this from some people with asthma who have that done. And I think some of mine is my asthma. But I have got into a bad habit. So, and you saw me just take a deep breath then, and there's no reason for it. It's that CO2 intolerance. That's if you struggle to stay asleep. If you struggle to get to sleep, or when you wake you struggle to get back to sleep, there are some other things as well that might be going on. So we have to remember that hormones are neurotransmitters. In other words, they're chemicals that affect the brain. Like all the other hormones in our body, our sex hormones affect the brain just as much as other hormones do. So we have to look carefully at how we're doing that. And one of the biggest challenges for us, as I said before, is the cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. So there are some really, really important things to manage here. And all the things that are around, bad things to do around sleep, are all things that will affect the cortisol levels and make it higher, and therefore increase your likelihood of sleep arousal. So, for example, cut out caffeine in the afternoon. And by caffeine, I mean teas as well as coffees, and I mean green tea because that's got caffeine in it. You want things that don't have caffeine in it. Don't eat later in the evening. You must eat at least 3 hours before you go to bed. Don't exercise in the evening because that raises your cortisol levels. So it'll mean don't exercise within 2 or 3 hours of wanting to go to bed. Because again, that same problem. Some people say don't exercise after 2 o'clock. But just be mindful that if you're exercising, you're going to need at least 2 or 3 hours, probably 3, after you've exercised to get the cortisol levels out of your system to be able to get to sleep. Alcohol is really bad for staying asleep because it doesn't allow you to go into deep sleep. It's basically going to help you fall asleep, but your deep sleep won't be there and you will be aroused from sleep quite quickly. Nicotine's another stimulant. It's like caffeine. You won't sleep well with that. Sugar and high carb. So if you eat things like refined carbohydrates and sugars, so rice, pasta, not whole grain, but rice and pasta, any sugars, cakes, things like that, our tolerance of glucose as we hit into the perimenopause, menopause drops. So our ability to manage the levels of sugar in our body, for want of a better way of putting it, our ability to manage that drops. So we are far more reactive to slight changes in that. So one of the reasons that you might find yourself awaking in the middle of the night is that you've hit what is called a cortisol high, because what happens with sugar in our system is if we have sugar in our system, it triggers insulin to take it out of the system. And then the insulin drops the sugar right down. It's very reactive. And when it gets down to really low levels, that triggers cortisol release to go, that's too low, I need to bring it back up. And at that cortisol release, that sudden surge of cortisol, that's a signal to your body to wake up and to be wide awake. So if you're waking in the middle of the night and you are wide awake, look at what you're eating in the afternoon and look at how regularly you're eating and the types of foods that you're eating, because it's quite likely it could be this sugar spiking. Okay, so look at that very carefully. Don't do any late napping and don't skip meals. And if you can avoid it, don't take sleep medication. They damage your natural sleeping structure. So they stop you getting the right patterns of sleep. So that you remember I talked about the 4 stages. When you take sleep meds, they disrupt that. So you don't get the refreshing sleep that you need. And they often make it really hard to wake in the morning. However, the goods, sleep hygiene. So question, how many of you have a good routine around evenings, bedtime, and getting up in the morning? So it's not just around evenings and bedtime, but also around getting up in the morning. Do you have a good routine? If you don't, you need to look at that. Mediterranean diet, so a really colourful diet, and that plate we've talked about before, with half of it being your colourful vegetables, a quarter of it being protein, and a quarter of it being carbohydrate. That sort of meal, perfect. Mediterranean diet. Exercise, but again not late in the evening, but exercise daily, a lot of movement in your day. Fresh air is key, because that is another thing that will allow us to drop our stress levels, and that's what we want to drop, that cortisol. And part of your sleep hygiene is getting that trigger for being wide awake in the morning. So cold shower, that'll do it. That'll do it nice, because that'll give you a lovely burst of cortisol. But getting outside. And what do you do in the mornings, Tracy? Because that's why one of the reasons why I put that card out this morning, even though I picked it at random, it was quite useful, because our morning routine is just as important. And one of the things I've been hearing is getting outside within 30 minutes of getting up and getting a real burst of bright daylight sunshine is really good for us first thing in the morning, which is why we probably find it harder with our sleep routines in the winter when the days are shorter and the nights are longer, because it changes when we get that wake signal to our brain. So you get out, which is perfect, Tracy. So, you're doing that quite well. Bedroom should be cool, dark and quiet. Clean bedding's a good one. There's a lot of research that says that when you have clean bedding, you sleep better. Don't know why, but there is. And, I certainly notice it when I change the bedding. It's kind of really refreshing. So try clean bedding, regular clean bedding. But also can't wait to go for the lighter mornings. Yeah, absolutely. Open the back door and stand there with a cuppa. Perfect, Yvonne, because what you're doing is you're getting fresh air and everything. That's a really good way to start the day. I turn the shower down to cold, but then I'm a bit of a sucker for cold water, aren't I? So these things around if you wake up in the middle of the night, if your brain is running 20 to the dozen, and I remember this happening to me, and what I discovered, and this is again something that is research that supports as well, is if you are trying to put the world to rights in your head and you're trying to think of all those different things you want to do, need to do, whatever, get up, write them all down, and then go back to bed. Reset, restart, do your routine around settling, relaxing into sleep. And your brain will say, oh, it's okay, I've got rid of those now, I've put those on somewhere else, I don't need to think about them. And it does actually do that. There was something else I heard about, which was get up and do something that your body and brain know is as dull as ditch water. And it might go, that's a bad idea, I'll stay asleep next time. Don't lie in bed. You know, if it's gone over 20 minutes and you're still awake, don't still lie there fretting. Don't do like my husband and just sit there reading for hours on end. Get out of bed and restart the process of going back to bed. Do something different for a short while and then restart the process. But get yourself into a really good relaxation routine, because relaxation and training yourself to calm your body and calm your mind will help you fall into sleep. And I've noticed this recently with myself, I've been focusing on it a little bit, is that whole thing of I can feel when I'm getting into that N1 state of sleep. I can feel my environment slipping, my awareness of my environment slipping away from me. And it's really reassuring. And it's getting into that routine of being able to calm. It's so important to calm. So a lot of people talk about supplements. And the interesting thing about supplements is they're rarely the answer. But if you've tried everything else and you're desperate, if you do try them, give them at least 2 months, because there's very little evidence that they work. Sometimes it's the placebo effect, but if the placebo effect is going to have an effect, if it's going to help you sleep, then do it by all means. Books are good for distracting my brain. I've fallen asleep with a book in my hand. Books are good for me books help me relax if I choose the right book. Sometimes I have to change the book I'm reading because instead of calming my brain, it excites my brain. So I have to be careful, but you're absolutely right. What happens with my husband, though, is he just gets engrossed in the book and doesn't sleep. So he lies there awake for 4 hours reading in the middle of the night. And every time I awake briefly, I'm awoken more because there's a light from the Kindle that I can see. So I don't like it, and that's why I want him to stop. But before you try the supplements, there are things you should try. First, look at the stress. There's different stresses that are in your life. Dietary stresses and lifestyle stresses and life stresses. Because the key challenge for sleep is to get that melatonin, cortisol balance in your system. And remember, more cortisol, less estrogen, more likely to have hot flashes, wake up with night sweats and things like that. So the most important thing for you to do out of everything that you do for sleep is to reduce the stresses happening in your system. So have the hygiene, have a simple routine that you stick to daily, every single day. That's critical because that trains the brain and says, this is when I sleep, this is when I wake up. Trigger it with things that release melatonin in the evening, that cause relaxation in the evening, that settle your brain, and trigger it in the morning with things that wake you up, which is bright sunlight and things that trigger cortisol. So get that right, and then look at lifestyle, look at stress, learn to say no, learn to realize that good enough is good enough, learn when to stop, don't work too late at night, because you will keep on going, your brain will keep on going. I know that when I've done these, I'm buzzing for so much longer, I have to settle before I can go to sleep. Develop relaxation routines. Now, people talk about meditation, and I've talked about my doorstep mindfulness, which is a 3-minute activity that just calms the body. If all you do is focus here on your shoulders, your neck, your head, and your chest, and then down in your arms, just focusing here and calming here, will calm the brain enough to allow it to settle into sleep. So notice, calm it, so breathe out gently, lower the shoulders, those sorts of things, and you will practice it you'll get better at it, and it does relax the body. As I say, brain dump, so you can park what's in your head. Get up and reset. Things around food. There is some evidence to say that certain foods, things containing tryptophans, can be helpful for sleep. So turkey, bananas, salmon, milk, yogurts, oats. So maybe there is something in that hot milk before bed, because it's not got caffeine, but it's got milk in, and there's something relaxing, isn't there, about a hot drink. If you're forced to work, all day, every day on a screen, and you're really struggling with that sleep routine, overexposure to blue light can trigger a delayed release of melatonin. So it can take quite a while for your body to notice it's supposed to be going to sleep. There is something called blue light blocking glasses. And if nothing else works, then try those. I've not tried them, but they're definitely advised. Weighted blankets as well, 14 kilograms, yeah, heavy blankets. But weighted blankets can sometimes help that relaxation, which will help you sleep. However, they might be too warm, so just be mindful of that. The supplements it's talked about are L-theanine, glycine, magnesium glycinate, taurine, and Montmorency cherry, which is a fruit juice. As I said, the evidence is very limited, but if something works, it works, and it's worth trying if everything else has failed. But you can also get CBT, and I would suggest that if you're at that stage where you think the only option you've got is to take sleeping medication, CBT is the next step before medication, because it can help you retrain your brain. And as I said, I'm going to be putting some places to go for help, including the self-test for how to test your breathing out tomorrow in my blog, and gives you some signposts and lists of some of these things that I've said, so that you've actually got that information in front of you. I'm curious whether this has been helpful, or if you've learned anything new, or if there's any questions that anybody has around sleep, because it's such a massively important thing for all of us. And when we can't sleep, it disrupts everything else in our life. And what happens is, because we can't sleep, we get stressed about not being able to sleep, and things get worse, don't they? So I'm hoping it's been helpful. It's been really nice to chat to you. I've really enjoyed finding this out, and hopefully you'll interact with the blog tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening.